Well, folks, today we're going to be talking about the state of Minnesota and specifically the 2026 Senate race that will occur. Now, Tina Smith, the incumbent senator, has announced she will not be seeking re-election in 2026. Smith, who was initially the lieutenant governor under former governor from Minnesota, Mark Dayton, who was appointed to replace Al Franken in 2018 when he resigned amid some sexual harassment allegations. Smith then had to run in 2018 in the special election. She beat out state senator and wife to former NHL hockey player Karen Housley, lost to Tina Smith in that initial election by roughly about 10 points. Now, you fast forward to 2020. Smith had to run for a full 6-year term. She ran against former Congressman Jason Lewis from Minnesota and lost by about close to 5.5 points in that election. Now, Minnesota is considered to be a blue state. It is a lean blue state. At the federal level, it voted for Kamala Harris in the 2024 race. It voted for Kamala Harris by about close to 4.5 points. The state voted for Kamala Harris. And while the last time there was a serious candidate running as a Republican who had a serious shot, you could say was Jim Schultz in 22, Ryan Wilson in 22, and then really going back, you have to go back to Norm Coleman, who ran against Al Franken in 2008. He lost by about 300 votes, I believe. It was really the last time Minnesota had a serious showdown, a political battle that was really set national records. We spent, I believe, close to $50 million in this race was raised by both candidates. The race wasn't even called until July of the next year. That is how close this race was. It was between Al Franken, a former actor and comedian, and then Norm Coleman, who was the incumbent Republican at that time. Now, obviously, there was a big third-party candidate who was in this race who definitely played into this, but it was one of the closest elections in the history of the Senate, period, and, of course, then in Minnesota. Now, this race, you could say right now, is considered a lean Democrat state. And if you were to ask me where I'm at, I would say I'm probably a lean Democrat state. Probably a little more than 5 points as of right now is where I'm considering this. But there was some big news recently. Current Attorney General Keith Ellison announced that he will not be running for this seat, and he announced Peggy Flanagan. Now, we know Keith Ellison is the very extremely leftist radical Attorney General in Minnesota. This is how radical he is. We'll put this out there. Keith Ellison is one of 2 attorney generals who is currently suing the Trump administration due to the restrictions on transgender individuals from being in women's sports and mentally ill young men being in women's sports, using women's restrooms, using women's locker rooms. Not even the state of California is suing the Trump administration for this. But Ellison, who represents the wannabe state of California, which we know as Minnesota, Little Somalia, this is what he's spending his time on. He's the same guy who tried to prosecute a state trooper in the state for keeping our streets safe. He is focused on attacking Donald Trump and national Republicans instead of keeping the state of Minnesota safe. That's why you've seen crime out of control in the state. This was the state where the George Floyd riots occurred. We had over $2 billion in property damage in the aftermath of the George Floyd riots. We watched a precinct in Minnesota burn to the ground and watched Keith Ellison do absolutely nothing about it. Now, he has endorsed the current Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan, who she is a extremely radical, pro-trans the kids candidate. This lady is about as far left as you can go. The only people further left than her is people like Ilhan Omar and Anaya Presley and the such. But this could be a gift for Republicans if they can get their act together. Now, we know this is the first time it was an open Senate race since 2008. Since 2006, I believe. It has been a long time since we have had an open seat in Minnesota like this. But the Republicans, if they take advantage of this opportunity, could capitalize on it. Now, I think it is difficult. The road ahead is very difficult. And there are a lot of issues with the Republican Party inside the state of Minnesota. For example, right now, the Minnesota GOP has major struggles when it comes to organizing their party properly in the state of Minnesota. We talk about this in a lot of our other videos. We talked about Wisconsin, the infrastructure from the bottom up. We talked about how the Republican Party has started to build infrastructure from the top down, from the national level down. When we don't have in a lot of these states like Minnesota, like Wisconsin, we do not have the infrastructure from the bottom up. That is how you win local races like this. You do not win local races when we have low propensity voters. Donald Trump will not be on the ballot. And that are just the realities that the Republican Party has to grasp with going forward. They have to grasp it that we are the party of low propensity voters. We are the party that has struggles on a very, very granular level when it comes to our organization, our ability to allocate resources properly, the way we have a pipeline of candidates that are prepared, that know how to run, that can be well equipped on the campaign trail to win elections, to win over voters. That is ultimately what the goal of all this is. You want to win over voters, and we do not have that infrastructure in Minnesota. And if we want to have even a shot of winning in 26, we need to start organizing that infrastructure right now. We needed to start, doing this years ago. But the Republican Party has had so many setbacks in the state of Minnesota. It is a joke. We have a pathetic party in Minnesota. We need to have Republicans who are going to take control. That is what we need. Take action. Take massive action. And take down these Democrats in the state of Minnesota. That's what we need. But I've talked about it many times. There are about 3 or 4 keys to this race, determining on which way it's going to go. Whether the Republicans might actually have a, slight chance of winning, or if the Democrats are just going to blow this out. So my first key to this is how far left is the candidate nominated by the Democrats? If the Democrats nominate extremely radical people in their party like Peggy Flanagan or Ilhan Omar, who are very, very far left, they espouse some of the worst policy initiatives that are promoted by the Democrat Party. Whether it is complete opposition to Donald Trump's immigration policies, which are very popular in the United States, whether it is opposition to the Trump administration's agenda when it comes to transgender men, the unfair advantage that transgender men have in women's sports, recognizing a biological reality that there are 2 genders. These basic ideas are something that these Democrats do not understand. They take the wrong side of these 80-20 issues. Then you have people like Angie Craig, where she's a little bit more moderate. She's still left. Don't get me wrong. She is still very, very left. But she is not as crazy. She is not espoused as the worst of the worst policies like Ilhan Omar. And Ilhan Omar, she's also an anti-Semite. She is not very friendly towards Jews. She's made a lot of comments that have got her in hot water regarding the Jewish community, whether it comes to Gaza and Israel or what have you. So if the Democrats decide to nominate a very far left radical Democrat, that is something that will be positive for the Republican Party. The Republican Party wants Ilhan Omar to run. They want her to get the nomination. Peggy Flanagan, I think, to a lesser extent, they really want someone extremely left too. They do not want a pseudo-moderate in Angie Craig, who is able to sell herself as a moderate, but maybe in reality she isn't. She's pseudo. She's swayed. She's a pseudo-moderate. But that is key number 1. Key number 2 is when it comes to the Republican Party. It cannot be overstated. The Republicans cannot nominate Royce White. They need to nominate someone who actually has a chance to win this seat. The reality is that a ultra MAGA candidate is not going to win in the state of Minnesota, for the same reasons that an ultra MAGA candidate is not going to win in the state of Maine or in the state of New Hampshire. That is why you do not have ultra MAGA candidates who are running there. Like in Maine, Susan Collin is not an ultra MAGA. She votes with the Republican Party 80, 85, 90% of the time. But what is the alternative? There's Republicans who are going to freak out about that. Oh, well, they shouldn't have to settle. The reality is do you want a senator who's going to vote the way you want them to 80 or 90% of the time, or a senator who's going to vote with you 2% of the time, or 1%, or 0% of the time. That is the reality of the barrel that we have to stare down right now. That is the road ahead. Royce White ran in 2024 against Amy Klobuchar. He also ran in Congressional District 5 in Minnesota, I believe in 2022. And let's just put it this way. Royce White got his smoked. The guy got smoked. Now, granted, was it a little bit better than what the previous Republican had done? Sure. But that had nothing to do with Royce White. That had to do with the fact that Donald J. Trump was on that ballot. That is the only reason. It was 15 points instead of 24 points. Or you could say 34 points. Amy Klobuchar is a very popular Democrat in Minnesota. There is no doubt about that. We know that. But Royce White is not the right candidate to run if we actually want to have a chance at winning. We need to see someone like Michelle Tafoya, Kendall Quayles, Ryan Wilson, Jim Schultz. I do want to know more about this Adam Schwarzy. I don't know a lot about him. I think there's a lot of potential there. But to be honest with you, I really thought Tim Pawlenty would be a good option. Tim Pawlenty is the former governor of Minnesota from 2003 to 2011. And I think Tim Pawlenty, because in Minnesota, you can run for governor for a third term. I think that would be a very, very good move for the Republicans. A figure that is recognized as being very popular on the Republican side of the aisle in the state of Minnesota, which is hard to find. So you cannot nominate Royce White. Number 3, you need to have massive funding from the inside of the party in Minnesota and the national senatorial Republicans. You need to have a lot of money poured into this race. That is just the fact of this. You need money to win. The 2008 Senate election between Al Franken and Norm Coleman, between the two candidates, they raised almost $50 million. It's expected that the total expense could be almost double that, could be upwards of $100 million in the Senate race in 2026. But, like we said, you need the proper infrastructure in place. Because what does, $100 million or $50 million of fundraising for the Republicans do? What does that do for you if you do not have the infrastructure in place to make sure that resources are allocated properly, to make sure that money is spent properly? Whether it comes down to training staff, campaign staff, making sure they know how to interact with the media, proper advertisements, phone banking, get out the vote initiatives, voter mobilization. How can you get people energized to vote for your candidate? You need to make sure that if we're donating money, and you can't be like Royce White, because in Royce White's situation, which you could read all about, KTSP, let's see, has a great article about this, which just kind of blew my mind. Royce White, in his 2024 Senate campaign, incurred $1 million in credit card fees. Like, what? Is this a joke? No. No, it's not. It is not a joke. We'll take a look at this right here. This is total operating expenditures. Look at this. Credit card fees. Holy crap. $250,000 credit card fees. $123,000 credit card fees. And WinRed Technical Services is a service that helps GOP candidates fundraise. $100,000, $110,000, or excuse me, $97,000, $63,000, $53,000, $40,000, $38,000, $27,000, $16,000. It's like we're talking close to $1 million in credit card fees. Credit card fees. This guy only raised $1.6 million. And you're going to tell me he spent over $1 million on credit card fees? This has to be some sort of major scandal. I am not kidding you. And let's listen to what he had to say about it.
Questions tonight about the campaign finances of U.S. Senate candidate Royce White. His 2024 campaign finance report shows he spent more than $1 million on credit card fees. As Chief Political Reporter Tom Hauser explains, that's nearly 70% of what he says he spent on his entire U.S. Senate campaign last year.
Royce White stunned the Minnesota political establishment by winning the Republican Party endorsement to run against Democrat incumbent Senator Amy Klobuchar in 2024. White raised more than $1.6 million for the campaign. He spent more than $1.4 million. But it's how he spent the money that is creating questions. According to a 5 Eyewitness News review of his campaign finance report filed with the Federal Election Commission, White's campaign spent more than $1 million on credit card fees. At nearly 70% of the total, it is, by far, the campaign's biggest expense.
I think it's impossible for credit card processing fees to be 70% of your campaign finance budget.
So we took our questions straight to Royce White. But nearly 70% of your campaign disbursements went to credit card fees.
Well, that's how it happens in digital fundraising.
According to the itemized list of your expenses, a little more than $1 million went to credit card processing fees.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Well, yeah, since the beginning of my time in politics, I've actually been very critical and outspoken about the way that money is raised in politics.
White claims the credit card processing firm he uses, WinRed, keeps 85% of money donated to his campaign. And his campaign finance report shows total credit card fees, again, making up 70% of his spending. October 24th, $260,766 in one day. On October 17th, $53,572. October 18th, $123,000.
Tom, you're saying the same
That's
thing.
That's $500,000 in 8 days.
Tom, you're saying the same thing.
In 8 days. Are you okay with donors knowing that when they donate money to your campaign, 70% of it is likely to go to a credit card processing fee?
Here's the deal. What I'm okay with donors knowing is this is the standard, whether you say it or not. This is the standard, at least the way it was communicated to me.
We checked.
That is literally the dumbest thing I've ever heard. This is the standard. This is the standard, the way it was communicated to me. In what world is there a digital fundraising platform that keeps 85% of your donation? This is the most insane thing I've ever heard. It does not exist. And if the Republicans, Royce White is running again in 26, if the Republicans really choose to pick this knucklehead again, they can kiss this election goodbye. This is what that race will look like. It will be out of hand. This guy does not know how to run a campaign. The way it was communicated to him that when he fundraises money, WinRed gets to keep 85% of it, I just don't buy that for a second. Not for a second. What is going on here? There's really something more going on. I don't know what, but something. It's really, really ridiculous that we're even considering allowing this guy to run again. But hey, if that's what they want. But getting back to it, looking at Poland, there is a polling out from Public Policy Poland in February shows that Peggy Flanagan is earning over 0.5% when it comes to the Democrat primary. Angie Craig coming in at 22%, Peggy Flanagan at 52%, with 27% undecided. And it's kind of noteworthy to say that Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, is not going to endorse someone. He has declined to endorse someone. He's not going to endorse his current lieutenant governor, which makes sense. You know, there has been some talk that they really aren't on the best footing, that there were some things she did when he was off running for vice president. But ultimately, this is a race that if these things line up for the Republicans, this can be a competitive seat. There's no doubt about it. It can be a competitive seat, but also I think a lot of it has to do with the overall environment. I think if it is a bad environment for Republicans, like these midterms typically are, I think this seat might be out of reach, even if everything else is like, that would be the fourth key, would really be which direction is the country moving. Is there things that Donald Trump is doing that maybe is making voters not want to vote? Maybe not even vote against them, but just there's not enthusiasm to get people out to the polls? I don't know. But that's what I believe. It's like that's what needs to happen for the Republicans to win in the state. Otherwise, Peggy Flanagan, the radical left-wing Democrat from Minnesota, is going to be the next senator. There's just no other way to put it. Like I said, I wish we could have seen someone like a Tim Pawlenty jump in this race. I would really like to see that. You need to have someone, like we talked about, that Susan Collin moderate. You need to find someone like that who can run in Minnesota, who can win here. It is about winning. It's not about being the most pure. It is about winning. How can we win this election? And I really look forward to working with whoever the Republican nominee is to help them get elected. We want to make sure that Republicans win. I think a good, strong Republican candidate can be a huge help to the Trump administration, but also a solid check on the Trump administration. There are places where Trump needs to get checked in. When it comes to tariff, I think there's some questions around whether Trump has the actual authority to implement reciprocal tariffs the way he did without congressional approval. I think there is really some questions around that. Whether it's unconstitutional or not, there's definitely questions there. But we need to, if Donald Trump wants to have a good climate, he needs to get his one big beautiful bill, his reconciliation bill, passed. He needs to make sure Republicans in Congress are working hard on the appropriations bill that will need to be passed by September. Republicans will need to pass not only just a reconciliation bill to cut taxes, but we also need to have an appropriations bill because we have a continuing resolution that funds the government till September. After that, we are going to need to pass a true appropriated bill. You need to take all the input that we get from DOGE and implement that into the federal budget. That is just what we need to see. So that's going to wrap things up for today, folks. Drop down below, hit that subscribe button. Don't miss another video from us again in the future, and we will catch you next time.